Hi everyone, this is Sous Vide. Today, I'm going to show you how to use one of these and make all of your meals exactly perfect. Stick around. Let's start by figuring out why we would want to use a sous vide to cook our food, to cook any food. The primary reason is that the sous vide is a more efficient, a more precise way to manage cooking temperature. For the most part, when you don't like your food, when you don't like a specific cut of meat that you get in a restaurant or that you cooked for yourself, it's usually temperature driven, meaning the temperature of that particular cook wasn't managed appropriately and you didn't like it. It maybe dried the meat out, could have been undercooked. There's a lot of different ways that could go. With the sous vide, it manages the temperature in a more precise fashion. An oven, a grill, an air fryer, all of these things have one thing in common: air. Air is the vessel for heat entering the food and cooking the food. With the sous vide, it uses water. You can see it here. We have water in a contraption, in a bucket, a pail, whatever we want to call it. And this water is what's going to transfer the heat. If you've ever gotten in the ocean or a lake and you knew what the temperature was prior, you probably thought, wow, it feels a lot different in here than it does in the air. Water transfers heat more efficiently. Therefore, when you put food inside of a sous vide while it's sealed, it will transfer the heat in a more optimal fashion. What's the result? Well, the most popular food we can think of where we can visually see mismanagement or perfection of cooking temperature is a steak. If you've ever cooked a steak on a grill or in an oven, you probably battle what's known as the bullseye effect. This means you get, if you're going for medium rare, you get the medium rare in the middle, and then you get more cooked to the exterior points of it. So while the temperature in the middle where you took it might be 130, what you wanted, the exterior portions as you go up and down and to the sides may be a lot higher and probably are. Let me show you an example of what that looks like right now. So as you can see with this piece of meat that we're looking at, it's got a bullseye effect in it. You can see the center is cooked medium rare, if that's what you were going for. Well, you got it there, but everything else is cooked a bit different. And in a lot of cases, we've just learned to live with that. In the case of the sous vide, we don't have to live with that anymore. Here is an example of a steak that I cooked, medium rare. That was cooked at 130 degrees Fahrenheit, 130 degrees Fahrenheit. That is cooked exactly 130 degrees all the way through. As you can see, that steak looks more like something that you would get in a 5-star restaurant. That's a result of the sous vide. Other examples would be chicken breast. The thinner parts of the chicken breast get overcooked, they get dry. Sometimes the entire chicken breast is dry. Any non-fatty meat is going to be traditionally a very tough cook using air. When people say that a sous vide is for boiling meat, this is completely untrue, and it's exactly the opposite. A sous vide is a low and slow cook, not a fast and high cook. Totally different. Because we manage temperature, we can set our temperature exactly what we want. Example, steak. If I want a New York strip steak at 130, I put it in, I set to 130. In an oven, you would set it to higher, because most ovens don't even go to 130, and if they did, that would take forever, and it would still have to cook all the way through. The sous vide is completely different. It's going to be set at the temperature that you want, and as long as you leave it in for the amount of time that you should leave it in, you're going to get that temperature. If you leave it in longer than you should, you're still going to get that temperature. If you leave a piece of meat in the oven or on the grill even moments too long, much less minutes or hours, the meat is probably overcooked to ruined, depending on how long you did that. Not the case in the sous vide. While leaving meat in the sous vide can result in texture changes, it will not result in a temperature change unless you decidedly make that change. So now we understand why we would use a sous vide. We get precision in our temperature. The next thing is, how do we use it? Because I think before people buy these, whether you buy it for yourself or you buy it for a friend, you probably want to know, is this really difficult and complicated? Here's the really good news. It's super easy. It's super easy to use. The idea is that you seal up food using either a vacuum sealer or you would use an immersion technique. I'm not going to get too much into that right now because it's just about using the device. And you would put it in to this water bath and you would set your temperature to what you want it to be, and then you return at the time that you've decided or that's recommended to cook it. Obviously you do want to cook it, and then the time that you or the temperature that you the time and the temperature you decide, you come back and you pull it out and you cut it out of the bag. Do you have to have a vacuum sealer? No, that is myth. Is it easier? Yes, it's a lot easier to do. Do you have to have this fancy container? No, you do not. You can use an ice chest. You can use a large pan from the Instant Pot. Works. Some people use their sinks. My friend Sam in Kansas City has used a sink before. So you can get pretty creative here. So let's just have a look at why you can do that. I'm going to lift this out. I'm not going to pull it too close to the camera because, as you can see, we're dripping. This is your screw that's going to latch on to whatever you want. So if you have a pan, if you have an ice chest, see, it gets real wide for things like ice chest. So you just do that, and this will tighten this so you can raise and you can lower, whatever you want to do. Just like that, not a problem, right? So as long as what you're trying to clamp it on goes like that wide, you got no problem. So I'm going to pull this into here. And as you can see, it's attaching. And once it's attached, you want to get it nice and gripped in there pretty good. Secondly, do you need to cover it? Because this comes with a cover, so it would stand to reason that if this isn't a Nova sous vide, by the way. They're not the only ones that make it. There are many other makers. It's what I use. If a Nova makes the cover, then you must have to have a cover. Some people will tell you that you do, but that's not necessarily true. If you're cooking a steak at 130 for 2 hours and you put enough water in, you're probably not going to have any issue. The cover stops or helps to ward off evaporations in higher temperatures, longer cooks, or a lower temperature for a longer cook. Water will evaporate. That's what heat's going to do to water. So that brings us to our next point. There's a maximum and a minimum line on here. Got to be above the minimum and you got to be below the maximum. The only reason you go above the maximum is if you fill it to the maximum and then you put a couple of steaks in there and it rises up above it. Typically, not something that happens as often, at least for me. The minimum can happen, especially when you're new. So the minimum line happens because of evaporation. So you walk away, you put in something for 5 hours, you come back and it's not working. So you don't know if your food cooked. Therefore, your food's not safe to eat. At least you don't know, which means it's not safe to eat. So it's important to keep enough water in there and to cover if you're going to cook for a long time, and just cover if you're going to leave. In covering, if you want to use an ice chest, if you want to use something else, you can use foil. You don't need this. But this just makes it a little bit easier, I think, to do it. So, we know how to clamp it on. We have to understand we need a power source, so you will need that. You can do this outside. As long as you have a power source, it's fine. I cook outside all the time. Now we look at our temperature. So on the top, we get our top temperature, which is what the water temperature is now, versus what we want the temperature to be. This sous vide is on, but it's not running. So it's showing me 65 degrees is the temperature. Below it's set to 144 because that was my last cook. I cooked a chicken breast at 144. So all I would do is hit my play button. As soon as I hit my play button, the temperature begins to rise. It's going to meet 144. Yes, I can stick my food in right now and I could walk away. But I need to know that my food was in at 144 for X amount of time. For a chicken breast, I want 2 hours. Now, the biggest question that people get after they start using their sous vide, or excuse me, the biggest question that I get after people start using a sous vide is, how can you cook at unsafe temperatures? You're not cooking at unsafe temperatures. 165 for chicken, and let's use chicken as the example, specifically chicken breast. 165 is an instant kill for bacteria. But time at lower temperatures kills as well. 165 is 1 second and bacteria is dead. The lower you go, the longer you can extend the cook, the more that you're going to kill the same bacteria. It's exposed to the same heat. Again, this is transferring heat optimally. And 165 is just easier for people to understand. You don't have to do that in this case, but you do have to be intelligent. If you want to seal up a frozen chicken breast, for example, you need to add another hour and let it thaw. That would make sense. If you've got a stick of chicken breast in right now, it's only cooked at 70 degrees. If I go upstairs and I haven't got to that point yet, well, that could be a problem if I start timing it on my iPhone or just in my head. I look at the clock. So be very, very cautious with that. And another thing is always look at your cuts of meat. Just because you can cook chicken breast at 144 doesn't necessarily mean the fattier portions like the thighs can be the same. This isn't a cooking lesson right now, so we're not going to dive too deeply into that. So now that we know how to set our temperatures, we do so with a dial. You can see I can adjust it right now. This temperature will move. I can do it while it's off, obviously, or while it's not running and while it's running. Easily set it to what I want to get to. The final thing that I'll say, if you're interested in buying a sous vide, I get a lot of questions about wattage. People think, okay, well, this one has more wattage, this one has 1200. I believe mine is a 900 wattage. I believe that you can get 1200 out of a Nova, something like that. Wattage is space. So the amount of, the higher the wattage, the faster it heats up a confined space of water. And in cases where you were using enormous tubs or buckets or pails or something like that, the more wattage you have, the more chance it will be to heat that space. If you have too low a wattage and too big of a space, you might not be able to heat that space. Therefore, you cannot cook your food. This is such a rare thing to run into. If you're cooking only for your family, the wattage is almost, doesn't even matter. If you're someone that cooks for 40 or 50 people, it might be something that you want to consider. You can look on when you're buying any sous vide, a Nova or otherwise, just look and see gallons, make your determination based off that. But I will say this, everyone thinks they're going to run into a problem because they don't have enough wattage. The problem that they really run into is that they don't have another sous vide. You would be better off having 2 sous vides than you would having a bigger wattage one. So if it's in your budget to get a bigger wattage one, maybe look at the second sous vide at a lower temperature. Why? Well, if I'm going to cook steak in here, I could cook, say, 5-6 steaks in here. I could get a bigger contraption, an ice chest, and cook even more. Well, I like my steak at medium rare, and so do a lot of people. But I promise you, when we start to get up to about 12 to 15 people, how many of those people want medium rare? Not all of them. How many of those people might not eat red meat? They might prefer fish or chicken. Having the second sous vide gives you diversity. So higher wattage can help you. It will help it water heat up a little bit faster. You can see right now we're at 76 degrees. I think we started at 65 earlier. So I mean, we're probably looking at about 15 minutes. So if we had a 1200 wattage, we might get there in half the time. So it can save you a little time. That could be a big deal. But again, typically you end up just needing the second one more than you need the bigger wattage. So it really is up to you. I hope this has answered a lot of questions for you. Please subscribe to the channel. I'm gonna leave the products that I use in the descriptions, and check out some of the other cooks that we've accomplished on the channel. I do like to do very simple things as well as more exotic things, so we'll kind of mix it up around here. Thanks and happy cooking.